people who suffer the father wound, for some reason, they tend to not have very healthy relationships. Um, they don't have meaningful. They don't form meaningful relationships, and I think it's because they growing up they we tend to replicate what we see growing up. So what are the effects of the father wound? How does it affect people? One, it brings about low self-esteem. The problem with low self-esteem is that it also now is the beginning of many other problems. And low self-esteem is a feeling of you're not good enough, you're not, you have limitations, you're not at par with other people. You have that feeling of looking down on yourself, so to speak. The problem with low self-esteem is that it can lead to other problems like substance abuse, uh, difficulties forming healthy relationships, an inability to trust people, because we talked about trust issues. And then there's also a lack of drive. And a lack of drive can be evident even at school when the child is growing up, and later on in life when they're at work. So low self-esteem in as a result of a father wound can produce a lot of other challenges: substance abuse, lack of or difficulties trusting other people or trust issues, relationship issues, uh, addictions, that kind of thing. Now, so one is low self-esteem. Number two, the other effect of father wound is problems with boundaries. When I say problems or having problems with boundaries, I'm talking about there are those who form very rigid boundaries. There are those who form very rigid boundaries, like uh, they set, if it is about time, they cannot stand people who like cannot keep time. They have structured their lives in such a way that their boundaries are they're very, very rigid. And this is as a result of having been let down a lot as a child by the people who were around them, especially the father, and therefore, as a child, they didn't have control. So, if a father was supposed to be there uh, for a school function and they never showed up or they came late, and that behavior continued, this child feels let down. So, when they grow up, they have a tendency to form very strict boundaries in a way or in an effort to be in control, because this is something they lacked when they were growing up. When they were children, they didn't have any control. But the other issue with boundaries is that it's either very strict boundaries or very loose boundaries or lack of boundaries at all. Like the person may set boundaries, but they are not really enforcing them. They are not observing them, or they are allowing people to test those boundaries. So they're not really, they're there, but they're really not there, or they're not there at all, at all, at all. And this behavior is formed by people who want to please others. Like, um, I don't want to go to this place, but so and so is asking me to go, and because I don't want to say no, I don't want. I want to please them, so I say yes. So you have formed some rules around what you can do and what you can't do, but because you are trying to make an effort to please everyone, so you end up violating your own boundaries. So boundary issues is one of the results of having a father wound. So you either have very strict and rigid boundaries, or you don't have uh, any meaningful boundaries, or you don't have them at all. Number three is poor relationships. People who suffer the father wound, for some reason, they tend to not have very healthy relationships. Um, they don't have meaningful. They don't form meaningful relationships, and I think it's because they growing up they we tend to replicate what we see growing up. So growing up, either the father was not there or he was there, but he was just in his own world. So if a child now is growing up and observing that, they don't see any meaningful relationship between the parents growing up in the house. So when they grow up, they tend to not have a very strong sense of how they can form healthy relationships. So usually they will end up in relationships that are not meaningful, that are not healthy at all. Uh, People who suffer the father wound also have a tendency to suffer from depression, from anxiety, and even from anger. And I guess this is as a result of thinking and reflecting on what they went through, and having missed what an ideal father should have provided. So, and it is especially lack of a loving father, or having grown up with an abusive father, or a father who was not really there, tends to be more impactful in a negative way. If a child was comparing his parents or his father with a friend's father. So children, a child is coming from school, going to the neighbors or to the friend's house, and they can see a loving father, a father who hugs their children, who laughs with them, who plays with them, and they start asking themselves, what is wrong with me? Why can't my father be like this? Now what happens is that child, they become anxious and they want to please their father, so they may do things to see whether they'll change their father, and when that doesn't happen, they may get into depression because of being frustrated. So depression, anxiety, anger, those can be as a result of having, a father wound. The other effect is repeating cycles. For some reason, people tend to repeat patterns of what they observe as they are growing up, or what they experience as they are growing up. So if you suffered a father wound, it is very, very important to seek help, because if you don't, and especially if you really focus on it and focus on what you suffered, you may not even know it's the father wound. But if you focus on the negative experiences that you had growing up, and you don't seek help, and you don't find a way to get out of, get help and get healing, there's a likelihood that you may inflict the same wound to your own children. So healing is important. And now we can talk about the healing. How do you heal the father wound? Number one, and the good news is that it's possible to heal from the father wound. Number one, acknowledge that you do have a father wound. So that's always the first step. Accept that you have a father wound. That's the first, because once you accept that, then you have started the journey to healing. Because you will not, if you have a physical wound and you acknowledge, yeah, I have a wound, you will not just ignore it, you will find ways to heal it. So that's the first step. Number two, allow yourself to experience the emotions that come with it. Like, how do you feel now that you know that this is a father wound? This is what I suffered. I didn't have a name for it, but now I do know that this is what it was. So how does that make you feel? Do you feel angry? Do you feel ashamed? Do you feel depressed? Whatever it is, acknowledge those emotions and allow them to wash over you, because there's a reason why you feel that way. And when you allow emotions to wash over you and they go, you kind of have more control over them, and they kind of tend to lose a lot of power over you. So allow the emotions, acknowledge those emotions, feel them and let them go after you have allowed them to come and go. So don't block them. Number three, it is important to grieve. And this will sound a bit weird. Grieve the loss of your father. Grieving the loss of your father doesn't mean that your father is not there, if your father is still there. But you're not grieving the loss, it's not like death, but it's still grieving, because you're grieving the fact that you didn't experience a loving father growing up, or a present father, or a father who, the ideal father. You did not, there are things that you did not experience growing up as a result of your father being how he was. So you're suffering a father wound because your father either was not present, or was not present emotionally, or was abusive, or was not nurturing enough, or was critical. That idea that you really missed a lot of that loving experience is what you're grieving. So allow yourself to accept the truth about how you grew up and about how your childhood was, because you can't really change it. You need just to accept it and allow yourself to slowly heal. And the same way we allow healing after grieving. When we are grieving, we allow the healing process to take its course. So that's what you're doing. The other way of healing is to also set boundaries, healthy boundaries. We talked about someone who may set very rigid or very loose boundaries, but now we're talking about setting healthy boundaries, because a healthy boundaries, and especially with your father, if your father is still there, the reason why you need to set these boundaries is because you have control over how you interact with your father, and how you interact with your father will mitigate any further wounding. Because remember, we said there's always a possibility. When we're talking about the mother wound, we are saying unless a lot of things have changed, unless your mother has changed, there's always a possibility of further wounding. So when you're putting boundaries around yourself, it is to protect yourself from any further wounding from your father. So if your father was very controlling, if you put boundaries around yourself as to how you interact with your father, it allows you then to know how far you can allow your father to influence or control your life. This way, you will minimize or actually cut off any possibility of further wounding as you're healing. Because if you keep exposing yourself to further wounding, you're unlikely to get any healing anyway. So, number 5, journaling. There are people who enjoy journaling. There are people who get a lot of satisfaction, a lot of healing, a lot of fulfillment with the practice of journaling. Just journaling whatever it is that comes to their mind. It helps them to express their pain and all the other emotions. So if you're a journaling person, that's a good thing. And for some others, it is writing a letter. Now, writing a letter does not necessarily mean that you're going to send this letter to your father, but it kind of gives you an outlet, a way of expressing everything that you probably never even thought about. And as you write, there's a tendency to remember a lot of things that you may have buried somewhere deep within. So writing a letter and expressing yourself as to how you feel about the negative experiences that you had. But even as you're writing that letter, it is important to remember and to write about the things that you're grateful for. Because in the midst of all that negative experiences, there are still things that you're grateful for. There are still things that you can look and say, okay, I suffered this, I went through this, but there are still 1, 2, 3 things that I'm grateful for. So that writing a letter gives you an opportunity to see the bigger picture and to be able to appreciate even the things that you may not have thought about before. So number 7, which is probably my last point today, is talk to a therapist. If you're finding it difficult to heal on your own, if you're finding it difficult to walk this journey on your own, talk to a professional, a mental health a professional who will be able to help you walk this journey. They may be able to, and the reason I say that this is because you may have suffered the father wound growing up, but some of the things you may be going through may have nothing to do with that. There may be other things that have happened over time that can compound this issue, and therefore sometimes it's just good to sit with a professional who will be able to help you look at the bigger picture, unpack, help you be able to express your emotions, be able to pin down different aspects of what it is that you're going through in the process of your healing. And therefore, because this is not something that is going to happen, healing is not going to happen overnight. It's a process, it's a journey, and sometimes for some people it helps to have someone walk with them. And therefore, I would encourage you, if you know someone who may be suffering the father wound, or if you have identified yourself as someone who has suffered the father wound, there's help available. It was not your fault that you did suffer the father wound. It's probably not necessarily your father's fault, because we said, as we started this video, is that sometimes the fathers may inflict the father wound unintentionally. They may not even be aware. So don't be angry. Don't be too quick to judge. The most important thing is for you to find healing for yourself, so that you're able to live healthier, more fulfilling life, a life that you deserve. So we will see you on our next video, and thank you very much.